I start by saying I didn't plan on doing this. It was a spur of the moment thing, and I don't know why I did it, but we'll see how it goes. I don't know anybody else that has done this, you know, showing off their top 50, top 100, whatever. But I I think you know, I've over the last 15 years, I've figured out I've shot over 7 million photos, and I'm trying to think of how many cameras I've gone through. Um, and the reason I got into photography was because I kept running into birds that I couldn't identify, or people told me I couldn't have possibly seen what I saw. So I started out with a digiscope that had a 3 megapixel camera built into it. The first one that came out from Kowa, TD1, was like $1,999, and it shipped straight from Japan. But I didn't have to learn how to do photography. And I took so many pictures with that in 7 months that I wore it out physically, broken two. So I got a brand new replacement under warranty, and I shot that one for about 8 months, and then uh, that led to my first Canon 20D, and I shot a 100 to 400 lens so that I could shoot flying birds on my first cruise on Monterey Bay. And you can't, you know, you need a faster camera to shoot flying birds. So one thing led to another, and next thing you know, you're buying a $12,000 lens and not burdened with your buddies anymore. So that led up to tonight, and my my pictures are kind of discretionary. I, you know, understand that some people will think, you know, there's problems with the picture, and I do too. I do too. I'm kind of my worst critic, but for whatever reason, I've whittled down 7 million pictures down to 50 that I really like personally. So we'll start with number 50, and this is a Louisiana water thrush. It was back in 2017. We were renting a place in Monterey for Christmas holiday, and somebody found this bird down at the Big Sur River, which is not a big drive from Monterey. And I'd been trying to find one of these for years and kept missing them at hot spots in Kern County and different places. So raced on down there. I had a Canon 7D2 at the time, and it took a while to find the bird. And I'm amazed I got this kind of a shot without a flash, because it was only 1/100th of a second, the frame rate. And I was shooting this Canon 7D2, which is notoriously bad at high ISOs, and this is 1000 ISO. So it's a miracle I got a good enough shot to clean up later in Photoshop. And so this is Louisiana water thrush starting off at number 50. And let's see if I can get to number 49. This may take me a second to figure out how to get to my I was afraid that would happen. Um, I looked up the pronunciation on this bird the other day. I've been calling it Palila for years. Turns out that's wrong. It's Palila. And it's a Hawaiian bird. It's really endangered. It only lives in like a 25 square mile area on Mauna Kea uh, mountain slopes. And it relies on a tree it's sitting on right there. It's called a mamame. And we were on vacation over there. I took a Mark III Canon with a little 70 to 300 lens and walked around. And I finally found one close enough, and they're pretty tame birds. They're a honey creeper, highly endangered. And I was really pleased. The reason that makes the top 50 is because it's so rare, and they may go extinct in our lifetime for all I know. So Palila from the Big Island, Hawaii. And that has a lot of ooh factor. That was just a gadwall duckling. And I happened to sneak up on a brood that was at the Fresno sewer ponds, and I got down eye level and almost on the water line and waited for him to come by me. It just happened to be nice light and everything was great. I didn't even have to sharpen this up. So it's just every once in a while you get one that looks phenomenal right out of the camera. That I don't know about other people, but it rarely happens for me when I get one right out of the camera that turns out phenomenal. I don't have to do anything except crop a little bit on the left side. So that's a little gadwall duckling from 2017, 3 years ago. And I'll be going back to sewer ponds tomorrow. My wife calls it my second home. This one was a dark phase snow goose. And right next to me when I shot this with Bob Steele, and we were doing a Christmas bird count at China Lake Naval Weapons Center. And this is my old high school baseball field, and the snow geese were coming in, landing, and there was a dark Ross goose that was around there walking around. So we were taking pictures of that. And I don't know what Bob's pictures look like. They're probably just as good or better. But that was a really rare bird. That was back in 2019, back in Eastern Kern County, my hometown. And these guys I always see in the wintertime. It's a Bonaparte gull, and we don't get them in breeding plumage very often around here. I've chased them and got distant photos of them, but a few years ago, me and Saxon and George Folsom went up to Gustine Water Treatment Plant, walked in there. I should say we drove in, but we walked in. It was back in 2016. And I carried my 600 millimeter handheld, and there was a bunch of these Bonapartes, and some of them were in breeding plumage before they took off for Canada or wherever. And we had a nice time getting them fly-by shots. So that I tried for 10 years to get one with a nice solid hood up close, and that was a really good day. So I was really proud of that Bonaparte skull. I think it turned out pretty good. And this is up, I don't remember this trip or this duck. I don't know where I shot it. I know it's in Yolo County somewhere, and I couldn't tell you where, but I've always seen other people get these shots of the male ruddy duck when he vibrates to impress the females when he's courting, and all these bubbles pop up. I've seen other people get a shot like that. And I don't know this. I took this shot in 2018, so I should remember where it was. But all I know is it's Yolo County, and he was bubbling away. I love these ruddy ducks. And San Joaquin Experimental Range on Highway 41 in Madera County, I've had access there for years, and I'd give them photographs that I took there for use, and it was a nice mutual relationship. And I was chasing Lawrence's goldfinches in this patch of fiddleneck, and I was having a tough time with them. I eventually got, you'll see later, I got one, but this lesser goldfinch came in, and I was just shooting him just because I could. I shoot any bird that comes close. And later on, I saw how nice this was framed by that V. So I've made a few prints of this and sold them, and that's a pretty cool bird. So Lego, just for the artistic, that made my top 50 just for the artsy-fartsy factor. That was back in 2017 also with my 7D2. This Folsom just went down Nevins Peninsula recently. I saw his eBird list. This is just off Dinky Creek Road up at Shaver Lake. And one day I had a nice cloudy day, and I had this green-tailed towhee that wouldn't leave this brush patch. So I went and put a branch across the front of it, and sat down on my butt and waited. And he started hopping around through there, and I pished, and he got up on my branch just like I planned and started calling, started singing. So I shot the heck out of him. I got a lot of good pictures from this one bird, but this is my favorite because he's got that crest flared up, and he's a little ratty, but that's a pretty good shot. That's the best one I've ever taken of a green-tailed towhee. And that was with my previous camera, the Mark IV, that I got from Canon factory used. It was refurbished actually. So I'm shooting the R5 right now. It's a mirrorless. I just got it a month and a half ago. So I'm learning that one. Then I was 72 in the last few years. Then Mark IVs before that, and we'll go through them later. I've got about 3 or 4 more I got to go through. Best green winged teal shot I ever took. That's almost laying down. There used to be a sewer treatment facility at Redwood Shores up in the Bay Area, and the ducks up there got used to people, and they would sit on a peninsula on an island maybe 30 yards away from people. And there was all kinds of real neat ducks, canvasbacks and shorebirds, you name it. So pintails. And this green winged teal came cruising by, and this shot just turned out right. I, if I'd have gotten at water level, you wouldn't be able to see any reflection of him. So you can tell when you got a little bit of an angle, but with birds, you want to get as close as you can to eye level with them. You don't want to shoot way down on them or way up at them if possible. That's one of my criteria for a good photo. And so this turned out pretty good with just catching his reflection and the good eye contact and everything. So buffleheads, you really have to have good light to show off those colors on the head, like a hummingbird's throat. It helps if it's cloudy, and then when you're shooting with white birds, it really helps if it's cloudy. So this was down at the River Center pond a long time ago, before I knew that you couldn't go down off the trail. I took my camera and sat down there at Waterline, and this was 2011. It's a long time ago. This was with the previous camera with the Mark III, so it tells you a long time ago. But this bufflehead, they're not easy to get the colors right, where you can get that exposure with that white, where you can get details in the feathers still without blowing it out. So I was pretty happy with that. It's still the best bufflehead shot I've ever taken. And he was probably, 30, 40 feet from me. And two of the most difficult birds I've had a time with trying to get close to is chukar and mountain quail. And they're extremely sharp-eyed, really jumpy. You can call them in during breeding season, but when they spot you, I've tried everything: ghillie suit, uh, just pretending you're a bush or a rock. They'll spot you. And so I finally figured out after 15 years the secret for getting these really jumpy birds to come up on a rock and carry on. I've finally went down to Butterbret Spring. This was in 2016, 5 years ago, in April 16th. It's my 72. And I saw this chukar up on a rock calling, and he jumped off of there and started chasing another male across the hillside, and they disappeared around the corner into another drainage. And when I saw that, I took off hoofing it with my camera and ran over, and I got eye level on the hillside with this rock pile. And pretty soon here he came back. He was limping, and I just sat down and waited, and pretty soon he worked his way up the top of that rock pile and started calling. I got really good video of this too, but I was 50, 60 feet away, and I had a great time shooting this chukar at Butterbret. And I haven't had a really good opportunity since then. I haven't really tried for them because I didn't think I could do any better than this. But Chucker and Butterbread, that was a great shot. Um, Back in 2013 on Thanksgiving, the day before Thanksgiving, I saw a report of a Bohemian waxwing from Zizix, which is down by Barstow. There's this natural spring and campground, a bunch of palm trees, a research facility, and it was about, I want to say, 3 or 4 hour drive from Ridgecrest. I was down visiting my folks for Thanksgiving, and I asked my mom how long it would take to fix Thanksgiving dinner. She said, "Oh, it won't be done till 2 or 3." And I said, "I can make it down to Zizix and back before dinner." And she said, "Why?" And I said, "There's a Bohemian waxwing down there." She said, "Oh, I want to go. I want to go. I want to go." She'd been to Sax-Zim Bog in Minnesota in the winter, trying to see this and a great gray owl, and missed both. So we had to go check with my dad, and he said, "No, I don't care." So we hopped in the car early and took off down to Zizix, and this bird was sitting on a mesquite, which is real ironic, because being from Canada, they hardly ever get down below, Montana in the winter. To be sitting on mesquite with those thorns is pretty ironic. So we found him. I got up on the hillside and shot him eye level, and he hung around. There was a young fella from the Bay Area who was sleeping in his truck when we drove in. We woke him up, so he came and got good shots of it too. And it was a one-day wonder. It was gone. It was actually chasing a female cedar waxwing or another cedar waxwing when we left, and so that's one of the farthest southern records for Bohemian waxwing in the U.S. When we got back home in time for nice Thanksgiving dinner, and I had this for a souvenir. And my mom got a lifer, and so did I. Back in 2013 at San Carlos Cemetery over in Monterey, one of their great birds over there found this rusty blackbird. And they're a threatened species. They breed in Canada, and their numbers have really plummeted the last 10, 15 years. So they're pretty rare. You get a vagrant in California every once in a while, but you go years between them. I remember there was one in Los Banos area one year I went looking for and couldn't find it at a duck club. So this was in the cemetery, and I found him after a while, and I just laid down on the grass and shot him. And I'll probably never see another rusty blackbird in my life. This was with a Mark IV back in 2013. It's a pretty cool shot. I like that. Everything worked on this bird. So it made it on the quality of photograph and the rarity factor. And this is a hard shot. I got lucky on this one. I was actually birding in Arizona down at Pina Blanca Lake, one of my favorite places to photograph birds down. It's probably 10 miles, 15 miles from the Mexican border. And they have different levels of walkways around this lake, 3 levels of walkways and picnic areas and stuff. And you get a lot of really cool birds. And I was walking on the lower trail, and there was a bunch of wild grapevines. And I saw a bird jumping around inside and had no clue what it was. This is first week of August. And I just did a pishing, and this little Nashville warbler popped down and hung upside down on this grapevine, and I was ready to shoot, and I shot him. And I've never gotten that kind of a shot of a Nashville since. I mean, that was really cool. And for him to be migrating already in the first week of August was kind of unusual too. So I got really nice sharp eye and good pose, and I mean, everything came together on that one. That was with the Mark IV in 2019. So that definitely made the top 50. The first turkey I ever took a picture of, there was 7 gobblers and 1 hen. And this was on Easter morning, I believe. This was, yeah, April 1st, 2007. Somebody can look that up. I think it was Easter Sunday. And it was with my Mark II-N that I bought used from Bob Steele. It was my first professional level camera. And it's the first of 5 photos from that camera that's making my top 50. That was, I forgot about that one. This guy was, they were so tame. This hen was going around pecking at grass, and then she'd come over and look at one of the gobblers, and he'd strut and fan and vibrate his wings on the ground, and she'd look him over, and then she'd turn and go the other way, and he'd kind of deflate everything and just slump. And then she'd look at another one, he'd do the fan and vibrating. And she just was toying with these 7 gobblers. And I was trying to take pictures, and I had to keep picking up my stool and back it up because they were getting within 8 yards of me in my minimum focus distance on my first 600. But I had to clone out a barbed wire fence in the background. So I did take a little liberties with this picture, but it's a miracle I didn't blow out the highlights in the head too bad. And that was a gobbler that didn't care about me at all. He had that one hen, and that's all he was focused on Easter. And that was back in, shoot, that was, 2007. I'm going to rework this photo. I can do better with that. The thing about bird photography, you hardly ever get a photo in digital photography comes right out of the camera, awesome, or you can improve on it. And I can improve on this one. I got a little flash factor in the eye there I need to clean up. The colors need to be changed. I can take some grain out of it. I mean, I can see problems with it. And if you're a serious photographer and you're trying to get your stuff published or sell photos like I do, you do a lot of processing and you get better as time goes on. So about every 6 months I'd hit a new plateau and I get better and better on processing. And you don't change a whole lot. I mean, you get a sharper eye about what you can change. And then you get better programs, better Photoshop features, things like that. So this was at Black Mountain, right near the entrance one year when the Stellar's jays came down pretty low and they were gathering acorns. And I didn't realize until later after I shot this shot that he had 2 acorns in his mouth. You can see the tip of one down his gullet there. And it was eye level, and it's best Stellar's Day shot I ever shot. And just before this, I almost killed myself climbing back up to my camera on this knoll that was eye level with this dead tree branch sticking out of some live oaks, and the rotten granite sheared off when I stepped on it and pitched me on my side, and I landed like a yard dart on my shoulder on this bench covered in pipe vines. And there was a big rock just right next to my head. I almost nailed that rock, and I don't know how long it would have taken to find me. But I was fine, didn't hurt. I just checked everything and I was fine. So I crawled back up to my camera and shook it off, and I had these Stellar's jays coming in, getting acorns, and I got these shots. So it's memorable for several reasons that I survived. And I'll go back and rework that. I've sold a few copies of this one. I had just recently finished a 20 by 30 on metal of this one for a young lady up in Prather area. And Western Tanager, this was at the Mammoth Trailhead, which is right next to the wilderness area. You have to go up Madera County up to the high country, like 7,500 feet. And good light that day. I had a field of these young pines, and he was foraging around. He landed on top of this, and I made a sound or something. He looked back at me, and I shot him. So it turned out pretty good. Western Tanager. This was June of 2012, a long time ago. I had my Mark IV in my first 600 millimeter. You know, we got Barrow's goldeneyes for years every winter at Bass Lake, and they were eating snails, big brown snails off the bottom. I think I don't think they were eating clams. I got photos, and I think they were snails, but they were real wary, and they'd never come within 40, 50, 60 yards of the shoreline. And the light was always lousy, and just, you know, I got a lot of photographs of Barrow's goldeneyes from a distance, but nothing really to brag about. So one year I went up to the Nimbus Fish Hatchery on the American River up in Sacramento County. This is 2019 in January, and I found these Barrow's goldeneyes that were all over below the fish hatchery, the weir where the dead salmon are and stuff. But upstream there's a dam for a reservoir, and I looked up there and I saw this side channel, and there was a group of goldeneyes going up it. So I hot footed down there through the gravel and all the stinking skeletons of salmon, rotten salmon, and the flies. And I flushed them out of there, and I sat down on the gravel on my butt and I waited. And it took them about 10 minutes to come back out of the main river, and they started swimming up this channel, and they were feeding on salmon carcasses underwater. And literally some of them swam too close to focus. They were that close, and I was just about eye level. And I wasn't shooting flash, but it was pretty decent light, as I recall, some high clouds, and it picked up that green and blue color in their head. So he'd just come up from diving, and you see all the water drops. And this picture turned out super good. I'll never get a better one of a Barrow's goldeneye than this one, I don't think. You can even see the little wrinkles in his beak. I mean, and I didn't even have to. In fact, I took some of the sharpening out of this picture actually, and I didn't blow out the whites. As far as I can tell, you can still see some grain in the white breast there. So it's actually a miracle shot, is what it is. The experimental range again, one winter, I was actually March 2017, and a lot of these canyon wrens come down out of the high country, the canyons, and they stay in that oak woodland foothills, and they're around rock piles and stuff. And I, right near the headquarters of the experimental range, I had this one making sounds, and I knew he was in there, so I set up, and pretty soon I got him on this rock. And I didn't plan it this way, but that red lichen on that rock with that tail, I thought was just spectacular. I got a really good series of shots with this guy. I got him singing on the side of this rock and everything, but this was my favorite shot. I didn't have to sharpen him up at all, really. It was just one of those great shots you don't get very often. That was just, what, 4 years ago. This is a trophy. There's problems with the shot. You can see on the left, you got some blades of grass that are fuzzing out the tail and the back leg there. But this bird took me 4 hours, and I only got one photo. And it's been a nemesis of mine for years. I've been going to Arizona since 2005. I went down there for the Southwest Bird Festival, Southwest Wings Bird Festival, and I've been going back almost every year since. I've been at 13 or 14 trips now, I think. And both sides of my family are from Tucson. So I just go down and stay for a week in a Holiday Inn Express on I-10 and roam all over Southeast Arizona every year. And until last year, I'd always done it first week of August. I've always wanted to get one of these quail on a rock with a clean background, calling. They do a whistle, and they close their eyes, raise their head up, and that golden plume shines. And I've always had an image of this quail doing that. And they have given me all kinds of fits. I've had 2 quail get on a rock with a clean background. Both times I had one branch of something in my way, and I couldn't get them in time. So for 14 tries, I've tried to get a really nice clean shot of this guy, and this is the closest I've come. And this guy, I had to climb up a hillside out of Florida Canyon at 6 o'clock in the morning and circle around behind him, and waited and waited and waited. And I had two of them coming in, and he hopped up on this rock finally about 8:30 in the morning. And I took one shot just for a record. And I wanted him to take one more step. He would be in the clear. And do you think he would do that? Of course not. And he hopped right off the rock. And then I played with him for another hour, and I never did get a clean shot of him. So I've been going back to Arizona. That's my number one target, is to get a world-class shot of one of these guys on a rock calling with a clean background. And I may never do it in my lifetime, but next March, that's where I'm going to be again, giving it another try. Got to have a goal. So this was 2014. So 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I've had my heart broken every year since. The Lazuli Buntings, this is one of the reasons I got my first camera. These were in raisin vineyards out in western Fresno County, Biola area, Kerman. And when I was a new birder, I told Jeff Davis I saw Lazuli Bunting in July, and he said, "That's impossible." I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, they haven't been reported from the valley floor in July since 1911. And I said, "They're all over the place." He said, "Well, you need to document this." And so I had a Coolpix pocket camera with a little zoom on it, and I got close to one on a power line and took a shot and sent it to Jeff. And he says, "By God, that's a Lazuli Bunting." And nobody knew that they were at some point between 1911 and 2000, they decided they liked raisin vineyards to nest in, and single wire raisin vineyards specifically. And they're pretty clustered. They got a bunch of bunches hanging down in a wad, and it's kind of the kind of jumble that they like to put a nest in that's hidden. So I went around documenting for years. Whenever I heard one or saw one, I'd put a little L with a circle around it on my field maps. And I've got years of records of these guys out in the vineyards from Selma to Madera. And so when I had a little downtime, I would call these into the edge of the vineyard and shoot them from a beanbag on my windowsill. And I've got dozens and dozens of pictures. Took a few years before I documented the nest, my first nest. And I remember one time I took Jeff C. and Jeff Davis out, and we found a female coming in with a grasshopper in her mouth heading for the nest. But someday I ought to do an article on these guys, because I don't know of anybody else that's been documenting these in vineyards in the Central Valley. And they're tearing out raisin vineyards right and left. So raisin vineyards are actually endangered species in Fresno County now. So, but these guys normally nest up in High Sierra on the meadow edges and in willow thickets and down into the foothills and brushy spots, and particularly after fires. So this Lazuli Bunting was in Thompson Seedless Grape Vineyard in Biola, and it was in 2017. I shot him from my pickup truck. And this was that day I shot that lesser goldfinch in that field of flowers in San Joaquin, the San Joaquin Experimental Range, fiddleneck. I got like eye level on a hillside, and there was a flock of them, and I just had to wait it out and wait it out and wait it out. And he finally gave me an opening. There was always something in the way, and finally I got an open shot. This best shot I've ever gotten of a Lawrence's goldfinch. And they used to always go down to central Mexico for the winter, but the last few winters we've been seeing them around here in the dead of winter. They've been a few that stay up north now. I don't know if it's global warming or we just never knew they were here before. I don't know. But This was in 2014 with my Mark IV. This, I've tried to get a good shot of a golden crown kinglet, and by nature, these birds like to be in a dense shade where the trees are tall. They stay up in the top of the trees. It's just really difficult photographing a bird like this and getting enough shutter speed. And you know, if you try to get shutter speed, then you have to give a high ISO, and then the picture looks grainy, and there's only so much you can do with it. But I got lucky one day. I had this back in 2015, I had my 7D2, which is notoriously bad for graininess. And I had that thing set at 800 ISO, which is high for that camera. I usually don't go above 400 if I can help it. But I was trying to get some speed, and it was so shady in this spot. I don't know whether he paused or what happened, but this was only 1/200th of a second, which is fairly slow. And I sharpened it up and adequately to be a pretty decent photo, I think. I can probably go with my newest software, go and redo this a little bit, make it even better. But I mean, this is just the best shot I've ever gotten of a golden crown kinglet by far. I may never get another one like this. So it was more luck than skill. And I've shot a lot of blue grosbeaks. I mean, just, they're pretty rare up here. They like patches of bull thistle or stinging nettle. And, but they're all over the southeast Arizona desert. Whenever I go down there in August, they're just thick. They're everywhere I go, not only to the river bottoms, but out in the desert, grasslands, you name it, if there's any trees around. So I've taken a lot of pictures of this guy, and I have a lot of favorites, but this just happens to be, I don't know why, just happens to be the favorite pose I've ever gotten, showing those brown wings and stuff and that head. And I can go back and do a lot better job on the processing on this guy. This bird is from 2017 with my 7D2, and I'll probably go back and redo this, try to lighten up the head a little bit. But there's always a problem with every picture if you're a real critic. But I love this pose, and it's my favorite one of the blue grosbeak. Right now, there was a pair in Madera County 2 weeks ago. Last week they were gone. Just so dry. There's no tall thistles or tall stinging nettle for them to breed in, so they're not staying around. This was a lifer, made the list because it's a real pretty bird. It was on a cloudy day. The tail's a little shot, but the head just is beautiful. I didn't have to do anything to this picture. It was from 30 feet away, and it was in Half Moon Bay. It was a LeConte sparrow, and they normally winter down in Texas or farther south. But this one was out in this field in Half Moon Bay. Somebody found it. So I drove up there. It was real kind of foggy, overcast. And then it started lifting a little lighter. But it took me a while to find him. This was 2017 with my 7D2. And it turned out really good that he wasn't too shy. And I just waited him out until he got out in the open and took a few shots. I didn't have flash, but that low light is just a godsend for bird photography. Try to have a little bit of cloud cover if you can get it, which we don't get here that often, not often enough. I'm going to redo this one too. This was from 2012, so it's 9 years ago. And this was Intermountain Nursery in Prather. And for those of you who've been there, when you pull up and park, there's a big manzanita bush right in front of you along the fence. And this was in March of 2012. So they were flowering, and I had this anise working it over, and I just got my camera on a tripod, got it all set up, and waited him out. And I've sold a couple shots of this bird too, but I'm gonna redo it a little bit and get the flowers a little darker and but that's the best Anna's feeding shot I've taken. I'm really fond of that bird, just the bird itself. Back in October 2012, there was a great gray owl that this is a first-year male, it turns out. He was down at a meadow outside of Oakhurst, private property, and I found out about him. And a couple other guys went up and took some pictures of him. And he's, you know, he probably came out of Yosemite more than likely, and he hadn't been around people, so he's fairly tame. So I walked up pretty close to him, probably 30 yards, and took some pictures. And he would fly around the meadow, and one time he went across and landed on this stump, and I went across the meadow and got set up and took this picture. And I think it'd make a pretty good frame if I ever had it printed. But I've taken better ones of great owls I like better. But so I went back a week later, and he was still there. And I took a couple of mice I bought in Oakhurst at a feed store, and they were $1.75 each, but I had to pay $20 for a carrier. So I had my 2 stinking mice and my $20 pink carrier, and he was sitting asleep on a branch of a oak tree, and I tossed a mouse out below him, and he got all excited and looked at it and everything, and I wanted to get a shot of him eating one. And pretty soon he went back to sleep. So I was down on my last mouse, and I tossed it really high, and he landed down below me, and he got all excited, and he flew down halfway, and he was just eye level on this pine branch. And I thought any minute he was going to go down and nail that mouse. And this is like 12:30, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Pretty soon he flew back up to his oak branch and went back to sleep. So I've still got that $20 mouse carrier somewhere in my attic, and it still stinks, reeks of mouse pee. But I never did get my gruesome owl shot. But he was, I got a shot of his tail feathers, and Jeff C. pointed out that they have a pointed tip to each one, and they don't lose that juvenile plumage until they go through their first molt the following year. So you can always tell a first-year bird by those pointy tail feathers. But that was really cool. I've had several great gray owl encounters, and that was one of my favorites. I've shot a lot of summer tanagers, and usually they're pretty scruffy looking, or they're kind of distant or bright sunlight. And up at the Kern River Preserve, I was chasing down a vermilion flycatcher that was breeding up there. Bob Barnes told me about. So it was a little bit of a hike, and I was waiting for this bird to come down lower. And I heard something behind me, and there was this summer tanager foraging around in a willow. So when it wasn't paying attention, I swung my tripod around and waited, and he finally came up right in the open, and I nailed him. And this was back in 2014. I had my Mark IV, and I had a 2X extender on this 600 at the time, because I was expecting to shoot a vermilion flycatcher, you know, 50 yards away, 40 yards away. So this guy came in right behind me, and it was in the shade, so I only had 1/250th of a second shutter speed. And I just got lucky. This is one of those lucky shots again. I won't do much to this. I might take my copyright and change it so it's right along the branch parallel, but that'll be later. But I've never gotten this good or better shot of a summer tanager before. I was up at the Kern River Preserve. Great place to go. This is the only shot I took that made the top 50 with a point and shoot. This is a Canon PowerShot SX50. I still have it. I use it mostly for video. And one of my growers had a bunch of peacocks down in Kerman, and this guy was strutting around. I never thought about taking a picture because there was always a real busy background or whatever. And one time he was right in front of this old tractor shed, and it had a pretty nice uniform background. So it was back in 2019. So I took a shot with my old pocket camera, and which I shoot raw, not JPEG. And so I did a little bit of processing with this picture, and I just love the way that it's symmetrical and nice clean background and everything. I went ahead and added it because it's one of my favorites. I'll probably never take a picture of another peacock in my life, but this is a keeper. So number 21, and this was in my backyard in March 15th, 2018. And it's feeding on a pineapple sage flower. It was right outside my patio. And I was sitting there with my 600 millimeter on a tripod in a chair, waiting for this guy to come around this bush, and a lot of flowers on it. And he got around the right side of this bush where he was silhouetted, and I just let him have it. And it just turned out really, really good. I've tried for better shots, and I've never gotten a better shot of a Rufus Hummingbird. And usually I'll get one male every March. They'll stay around for a day, 3 days tops. And they wreak havoc with all the Anna's hummingbirds and chase them away from the feeders, even though they're smaller. And then thank goodness they leave for British Columbia and let my yard go back to normal. But I always try to get some photographs when they'll stay around. You see a little bit of pollen on his beak there. He's probably been feeding on some neighbors' flowers like trumpet vine or something too. But this was a really fortunate shot because I had the 72 at an 800 ISO again, which I normally don't do. I had a 1.4 extender in there, so that slows it down even more. It was 840 millimeters, and it only came out to 1/250th of a second. And to get that kind of a wing pose at 1/250th of a second, it was just, that's another miracle shot. I'll never get a better one than that with that kind of setup. So that definitely made my top 50. Number 20, I got lucky. They were having the Morro Bay Bird Festival in January one year, and I wasn't going to attend the meeting, but I wanted to go to their bird bazaar where they have a lot of vendors, and I want to look for carved birds and t-shirts, stuff like that. So on the way over there, I did a little bit of birding. One of my favorite places just north of Cambria is called San Simeon State Beach. And it's got this lagoon just next to the ocean, and on the beach between the lagoon and the ocean, there's always a lot of snowy plovers. A lot of them have bands on them. And I didn't have any idea they had found this bird earlier on one of their field trips. And it's an Arctic loon. So it's in January, and they almost never get this far south. And to have him floating around this little house-sized pool of water was just phenomenal. So I got down at eye level with him, and he finally got used to me, and he kind of cut the distance in half, and I took a lot of photographs. One of them ended up on a cover of Western Birds, I think, one of the vertical shots I took. But that was a lifer and just really cool looking bird. Just point blank, you can even see water droplets on his back. So I was really happy. This one made it just from the rarity factor. And as with that was so long ago, that was 2012. I had a Mark III camera. So I've gone R5, 72, Mark IV, Mark III. The Mark III I bought used from a guy in Ohio, one of the best bird photographers I've ever seen, Robert Royce. And bought it used. It comes in the box. I opened it up and it smelled like an ashtray. And I couldn't figure it out because he's a professional French horn player for the symphony there. But I don't know, either somebody in his house smokes or he did, I don't know. But it took months for that smell to wear off that camera. So that was my Mark III, San Simeon State Beach, 2012, Arctic Loon. This, I've taken a lot of good shots of California quail. I've got one I like just as much on the same pile of wood where the wood is more level. In fact, I just sold one to a lady in Mariposa, and then another one I donated to Sierra Foothill Conservancy. It went for $190. And I've got this framed over my desk right now. So this is good shot. And I actually took it from 20 feet away on a beanbag out of my truck while I was eating lunch at one of my growers in Kerman. So there's a bunch of quail hopping around this wood pile, and I think it was old grape stumps actually. But it just, everything about it turned out beautiful. And I've donated 2 or 3 of these prints to Foothill Conservancy, and people just love them. I don't know, something about the detail in this bird. So that's my favorite California quail shot. Virginia rails are real secretive, and you almost never get them out in the open, and you never get them with a clean background either. And I was in Coalinga. I was way back in 2008. This is the second one I've got in the top 50. This Mark II-N I bought from Bob Steele, and this I had, it was a pond that was drying up. It was almost completely dry. It had some cattails, and I saw a bird on the mud, and the sun was going down, and we were about ready to head back to Fresno. And I saw this Virginia rail out in the open, and I thought, I can't pass this up. So I got my camera together, put a 2X extender in there, grabbed a couple of tumbleweeds, put it in front of my tripod, and I sat down on my stool and I waited. And it didn't take 2 minutes, and this guy came right back out on this mud flat and started foraging around. I don't know if it's a juvenile or not. I'd have to look in my book. But man, I was just tickled to get one out in the open with this kind of sweet light right at sundown in Coalinga. This was with that Mark II-N, and I only had 1/320th of a second frame rate. So it must have been one of the few times when he actually wasn't moving quick. But that's by far and away the best Virginia rail shot I've ever taken. I'll never get another one better than that. So that was number 18. Number 17 is a spotted owl. Young guy, I won't mention his name, does spotted owl research, or did, up at a Sierra National Forest, and he was nice enough to take me in to see a bird that they had been checking on that later had some babies. I didn't get to see those, but it wasn't very high elevation. I don't think it was 4,000 feet even, but it wasn't very hard to find her. They come right in because they're like dogs. They're trained to, when they hear biologists coming, they know they're going to get a free mouse. Unfortunately, we forgot the mouse, and so this owl was disappointed in the end, but she came in and I got some shots, and it was quite a steep hike to get up in there. I had that Mark IV, this was back in 2016. I had an 800 ISO, 6.3 focal length, and I only got 1/80th of a second. It was that dark on this hillside, but it turned out pretty good. There was another shot of her looking straight at the camera that I sold the print to a guy that loves spotted owls. So I'll probably never, that's the first spotted owl I actually saw. I've heard him before at night, but I've never seen one before. So that was really magical. Any experience you have with an owl in person seems like you go away feeling like you had a magical kind of an encounter. It's pretty rare. So I thank that young man for taking me in there. This I got a lot of nitpicks with, but you don't know how many times I have stalked a painted redstart in August in Arizona in the canyons, trying to get one in focus, foraging. I mean, just, you talk about heartbreak, it's almost as bad, not quite, but almost as bad as Montezuma's quail. And I finally nailed this one. I don't remember what canyon, I think it was on Mount Lemon, but I don't remember what, I think it was, might have been the gulch below Incinerator Ridge. I just got one lucky shot where my camera, I actually focused on the bird, not the tree or the background behind. That just constantly happens with a fast moving bird. And this was in, God, I don't know how many years ago it was, but it was only 1/40th of a second without flash. And I actually got his head in focus, pretty much in focus. I can't believe it. It was only 840 millimeters, 640 ISO, 1/40th of a second, no flash. It was one of those lucky shots. I'll take it. It's the best painted redstart shot I'd gotten up until now. So I don't know if I'll spend any more time chasing those around the canyons anymore. I may with this R5 though, I think I can nail a better shot now. I can get a high ISO and use the eye focus and it'll track them. So it's like cheating. So I'm ready to tackle them again next time I'm in Arizona. But so far, this is the best I've been able to do in 13 trips. So that's 16, 15. And I'm gonna do a little work on this one too. I can lighten this up, I think, or change some things about it, but it just happened to be a peregrine circling me. It had a kill at the Fresno sewer ponds and a red tail came in and stole it, and it was angry. This is what an angry peregrine looks like. Can't tell, but it circled around, and I had the 600 handheld, and I just took a whole lot of shots. And I had this one that it actually focused on the bird miraculously, and it was 1/3200th of a second frame rate. So I'm gonna probably rework it, take some of the noise out of it, but someday I'll learn how to change the background color, and I'm gonna change this to a light blue or something and spruce it up a little bit. So, but that's the best peregrine shot I've taken to date. This was in Monterey in 2017, black oyster catcher. And I've spent a lot of time photographing them on the rocks at Point Pinos and different places along the ocean there. But they're very difficult to get a really clean shot of them. And there's always a lot of rocks and interference. And this one happened to turn out pretty good. I had him with that muscle, that link, I don't know what it is in his beak. He was splitting it open. But I've got a lot of shots of black oyster catchers, and none of them I like near as much as this one. I doubt if I'll ever improve on this guy. So I definitely had to make that's number 14. Years ago, I was down in Tulare County or Kings County, one of those places where they had a lot of drain water, and they had cattails, and a lot of these white-faced ibises were nesting in there. And I didn't realize white-faced ibis eggs are robin egg blue. They're amazing. But they built a little platform in the cattails and laid a couple eggs. And so they were coming in and out of this cattail patch. And I drove along the canal bank, and I don't remember if I had some clouds. I may have had, it seemed like I had pretty good light. It might have been high clouds. But the light was hitting the iridescence on these feathers just perfect. It was like oil on water, like an oil sheen. And I shot him handheld with the 600 from the truck window as he was coming by, heading back for the nest. And it was 1/2000th of a second. That was with my Mark III, ISO 320. It was back in 2010, so 11 years ago. And I have not gotten a better shot than that of a flying white-faced ibis. And it was sharp to boot. I couldn't believe it. So that definitely is a keeper. That's definitely in the top 20. I mentioned two of the hardest birds were chukar and mountain quail. And I've had mountain quail, suckered to their call and hop up on a rock, and I didn't even move, and they'd immediately hop back down. I was dressed in a ghillie suit one time with a face mask, all camoed up, hiding behind a branch of a bush in Butterbrett Spring, and I called a mountain quail up the hillside, and he hopped up on the rock, and a split second later, he flew off of that rock as soon as he spotted me, and I didn't even move the camera. I didn't move my hand. I didn't do anything. What do you have to do to get a mountain quail to stand still? And it took me a few years to figure out the secret on these guys. And now I'm getting a little bored shooting them. Actually, I got this one back in 2015, 6 years ago, with a 72. It was 840 millimeters focal length. And he was 40 feet away, came up on an old rotten log, and he wouldn't leave. And I'm sitting there, I got this branch hanging over my barrel, and I'm sitting in under a bag blind, and he had no idea what I was. And he just paraded around. I got shots of him calling. I got video of him calling, parading back and forth. And I got tired after 10 minutes of shooting this mountain quail, and I stood up, and he just stared at me. He still didn't know what I was. So the light was perfect. He was real close. See all the feather detail, eye level, everything you want in a mountain quail shot, except maybe if he'd have been on a mossy rock, it would have been, I'd give it 100. But this is pretty close to perfect for a mountain quail shot. So I've got a lot of good ones that would be in second place, but he made the top 50. Number 11, I'm sure a few people watching this will have gone up to Calusa to see this falcated duck. They normally nest in the Arctic, Siberia, going down into Southeast Asia, Korea, stuff for the winter. So I saw one in Oregon many years ago when I had my 20D, took some so-so shots. And then this one showed up 10 years later down in Calusa National Wildlife Refuge, and he was right out in front of the observation deck, and he would stay quite a ways away, 60, 80 yards away normally, but then he'd get excited about some hen widgeon or something, and he would start following him in closer. And everybody would just sit there waiting for him to get a little closer and take some shots. And they get their name from those long secondaries that falcated duck. They're about the size of a widgeon. And he was there one winter, then the next winter he was not, and the next winter he was back. And then it was the year I shot him, it was 2014 in Calusa. And this was at 1200 millimeters. I had my 2X extender. He was probably 40 yards out, maybe swimming past the platform. So he made it just from the rarity factor, and the picture's not too bad. I was up at Sacramento, and I don't remember this northern harrier at all. I don't know where I shot it. It was a windy day. It may have been, I think it might have been on a canal bank, but this bird was following the canal bank, heading toward me. And I think I might have been, I can't remember if I was in the truck or not, but he was trying to maintain his position against the wind, and he was more interested in hunting than me. And I just let him keep closer, coming closer and closer. Only way this could have been better if it was a white, the gray ghost like Bob Steele got great shots of one. And and I've never gotten great shots of one of those, but this is either a juvenile or a female northern harrier. And I took a few shots when it was way out, a few more when it was closer, a few more when it was closer, and it got, I don't know, 50, 40 yards from me and before it finally peeled off. But it was nice because it was frozen in that wind, and I was shooting 840 millimeters. It was 1250 ISO with the 7D2, and I managed to get the graininess pretty much out of it. But I had it dialed up to 1/3200th of a second frame rate. So it came out pretty sharp, pretty focused. And it was just that dry grass background. It just looked golden. And I've printed a few of these up and framed them and sold them. And I may keep one of mine and put it in my den. But that was number 10. Number 9, these sandhill cranes. You know, I went all the way down to Boston Apache in November, December one year in New Mexico and about froze to death, 23 degrees. And you can get these and snow geese pretty close. And a lot of photographers. When I went down there, it was 300 people with big cameras and lenses down there photographing these guys. I never got a shot as good in 2 days at Boston Apache as I did from my truck at Casumas River Preserve in Sacramento County. And they're coming into a rice stubble field. And I was just sitting there in my truck with a beanbag photographing birds flying in. And it was a nice light, nice cloudy, fairly cloudy, it was lower light. 1,000th of a second, 840 millimeters, 400 ISO with the 7D2. So I've processed a lot of sandhill crane photos, and this is by far and away the best one, my favorite. Getting 2 birds in focus on the same plane, that's not easy to do. This wood duck, when I first got serious about photography, I practiced on these wood ducks in Fresno. Now, I don't know whether this was Roding Park or Woodward, but it was in 2009. It was with Bob Steele's Mark II-N. It probably was 2 or 3 years after I got my first 600 millimeter. But I don't know whether I shot it with that or the 100 to 400. I can't remember. I don't have the data on it. But I got down as low as I possibly could to the water and had a nice cloudy day. And I took a whole lot of shots of wood ducks. And most of them, I blew out the white or that patch on the beak. It was just glaring, you know, you couldn't tame it down. This is marginal. I mean, it's still a little bit bright in spots, but it turned out to be one of my favorites because all the water droplets on its tail and whatnot. And I'll probably take better ones down the road, but this is one of the first really good bird photos I ever took back in 2009. Number 7, this is here for artistic composition, feather detail, colors, great background, eye level, and the fact that I tried for 15 years to get a decent shot of an American kestrel on a clean perch and clean background. I just failed. The only time I could get them would be on a fence post. And I got a thing about man-made articles in a bird photograph. I just don't like it normally, although I did shoot a peacock in front of a tool shed. But I tried and tried and tried to get a good shot of a kestrel. And they would tease me, toy with me. And one day I just got lucky in frying. I was on the canal and I came around a bend and there was a bird sitting on this dead stick. And I got the camera out on the beanbag and I thought, he'll fly. I can't get closer, I'm sure. And I crept a little closer, crunching gravel and everything. And he just sat there. And I turned the truck sideways and killed the engine and started shooting. And this is the result. It's almost full frame. I mean, I didn't have to crop this much at all. So it by far and away the best shot of a kestrel I've taken in 15 years of trying. And it's definitely a trophy. I mean, I may get a better one this some other day, but I doubt it. So that was 2017. So number 6, one of my favorite places to photograph, that San Simeon State Beach. And I went over there in March one year, 2014. Had my Mark IV. I had the ISO dialed up to 1250. Try and get some shutter speed. It was foggy. You can see all the water droplets on that spider web down there. And I had the 1.4 extender in there, so I was 840 millimeters. And I was just looking for something to shoot in the fog and waiting for the fog to lift. And it was starting to get a little lighter. And I saw this Allen's hummingbird zipping around through some willows, and he wasn't perching anywhere that I could get a good shot of him. I was up on a road edge, and I finally saw him land in the open on this little, I think it was an old stinging nettle plant or something. So when he left, I went over there and sat up and sat real still. After a while, he came back, and I took the shot. I've sold a couple copies of this one. There's one of these hanging out in a farmer's office out in Three Rocks. And it's just one of the greatest shots I've ever taken. The nice fact that you have that cloudy, overcast, diffused light on that gorget, and you can see the detail in that spider web with that moisture. Just, it's a one-of-a-kind shot. I'll never get a better one than that of an Allen's hummingbird. So that's number 6. Number 5, red face warbler. This was in last May 2020. 1/200th of a second, ISO 320, 72, 840 millimeters. I've never been able to get a decent shot of one of these in August. They've always been post-breeding with mixed flocks of warblers, just impossible to get close to. And I always thought if I could get here when I retire, get here in the spring, maybe I'll get one of these guys on territory, and I did. And got a lot of good shots in March of these guys, but they're one of my favorite warblers. And then they just go right back to Mexico in August or September, October, and you don't see them again till next spring. And you can only get them in southeast Arizona and the Sky Islands and a few spots in New Mexico. Number 4, prothonotary warbler. Back in 2008, in October on Point Reyes at the fish docks. This was with my Bob Steele's Mark IIN, and I got up on a hillside, eye level with the middle of these pine trees, that there was a flock of 7 different warblers, and 5 of them were eastern birds like black Burnian and black pole and black-throated blue and this prothonotary. So this was a lifer, and I was having a heck of a time getting them to sit, you know, in a still spot and get focus. And this is only 1/200th of a second. ISO 200. Like a beginner, I should have dialed the ISO up higher, but I didn't know better. But she hopped on this pine thing and just froze for a second, and I got this shot, and I'll never get a better shot of a prothonotary. It's a lifer, and I think it might have been on my birthday, actually. So that's one of my favorite pictures I've ever taken. Indigo Bunting. This was in May 2019. Jim Teets found this on one of his bird surveys at the old French fire on the backside of Mammoth Pool, the south side, and told me about it. It's only second Madera County record. The first record was over in Devil's Postpile. And so I hiked in 9/10 of a mile with my rig, and it was a cloudy day. Found him singing on territory and waited him out and got some great shots. And this was a flash F10 640 ISO with a 7D2. And I printed one of these up on metal and gave it to Jim as a thank you. And as far as I know, Jim and I are the only two that ever saw this bird. And I thought about going back into this year to see if he's still around. This is 2019. And that creek fire last year came through the same area and just burned it to smithereens. But what's moved in that burned area is black-throated sparrows. And one of the surveys had 8 of them in there. They think it's desert, I guess. So anyway, that was one of my favorite shots for all times, that Indigo Bunting, for rarity and for the colors and everything. It just looks spectacular on metal. Number 2, if you go on my website, woodshots.com, this is the opening page. This guy was in Las Banas, a vermilion flycatcher. He came back to the Ideal Duck Club 7 years in a row, all winter, and he'd disappear, come back, and he had this little routine where he'd go through the yard, shop yard, past the front of the house, out into the marsh, come back around, and did this loop. And so one day I went out there on a cloudy day, and I had the whole place to myself. And I got to be friends with the guy that lived there, that owned the duck club. And I tried to give him a print of this, but he said his place was too cluttered up already, and he knew what it looked like. So I've made a few prints of this, but it is spectacular. And I had to actually take some of the saturation out of the red and orange because it looked too fake, and it still looks super saturated, but believe me, that's actually less bright than it looked in person. And I was probably 50 feet from him, and he was working a barbed wire fence line, and I finally went and broke a stick off a bush and stuck it in the fence. And he came back that way, and he hopped up on my twig, and I took this shot. It's my second favorite shot of all time behind this one. This is the best photo I've ever taken. My business cards have this on there. It's a great gray owl. It's one of the 2 farthest south nests ever located in the world, latitude-wise. It was at Shaver Lake. She raised, they try to nest in the top of these lightning-struck trees. She raised 2 babies 3 years in a row that I know of in Southern California Edison property. So there's another chick behind the first one, and I knew about the location in June. I went and hid behind a pine tree. This is back in 2007. I had the Bob Steele's Mark IIN, and I had the ISO on that thing dialed up to 320, f5.6. I only got 1/80th of a second, and I was on soft pine needles, hiding behind a tree, sitting on a stool for 45 minutes. My legs were asleep. I had to pee. It was excruciating. And she was sitting on a tree above the nest and wouldn't come down. And I was shooting the babies. The 2 babies were playing around. Finally, a raven flew over croaking, and she got nervous, and she glided down, landed on the edge of this tree. And the babies were nibbling on her breast feathers, you know, begging. And I took a few shots of that. And then I went, and this is what happened. And I fired off a burst of 6 shots, and every single one of them is sharp as a tack. I didn't have to sharpen them one bit. I had to crop it a little bit, clean up the background, but that's a shot of a lifetime. So anyway, that's my top 50. And I don't know how many questions we got piled up because I couldn't see my dealer wampus.
Well, actually, thus far, we only have one question, and it is from Nancy Gilmore.
Okay.
Let's see here. Are you able to can you see that, Gary? The question that she asked, or do you want me to read it off?
Somebody said they couldn't hear. Excellent program. What post-processing software do you currently use? Okay. I've been on Photoshop for many years and kind of learn as I go. And like I said, every 6 months I'll have a new epiphany. I'll learn something new on there. And I don't remember, Bob showed me a few starting points with it, or that came along later. Bob Steele's the one that got me started, really. And so I've done Photoshop where you buy the program all the way up to CX6, and then they change it to where you have to rent it from Adobe on a monthly basis. So I resisted that forever until I bought a camera that wasn't supported by CS6, so I had to go ahead and rent it. And so I'm on Photoshop. Recently, they came out with Topaz Sharpen, Topaz Denoise, and another one that just came out. And they're based on artificial intelligence. And I saw Alan Murphy and Glenn Bartley promoting them on their websites. But I didn't buy those programs because I figured I'd find a way to not be able to use them, whatever. Well, finally, I just went ahead and got Topaz Denoise and Sharpen about 3 weeks ago. My God, are they easy to use? Oh my God. And I've started going back through all my old photos from 2005 or 2007, and I'm about halfway through them. And I'm starting to reprocess a lot of birds that I just could not sharpen up or get rid of the noise with Photoshop with my skill level. And it's amazing. So if you ever go on wood shots nowadays, I'm putting on new photos in there like every 2 or 3 days. I've got 3 or 4 more new ones to go. And I've got 6 waiting right now. I'm going to put on probably tomorrow, half of them at least. Varied thrushes and different things. I've got some mountain bluebirds. I can't figure out how to change the background yet. But I got 2 of those that are spectacular now. They were a little grainy. So if you're shooting in RAW, you can change pictures dramatically with processing. If you're shooting JPEG, you're going to have problems because you've only got about 1/7 of the amount of detail in a JPEG file. That's why you can send them on email. They're small files, but they, like if I'm shooting a camera right now, it is 40 megapixels. It means there's 40 million red, green, and blue dots in one picture. And that's a lot of information you can change if you have a glary spot or, shadows are too dark or whatever. You can change quite a bit of information, but you got 1/7 of that amount of information in a JPEG. So Topaz Denoise and Topaz Sharpen, you can still make some changes in JPEG that'll clean up a lot of photos, but you can't change nearly as much as you could with a raw photo. Unfortunately, that takes a lot more room in your computer, but you have to learn how to do Photoshop and whatnot to process. So yeah, it's always been Photoshop, and then Topaz is just something brand new in the last 3 weeks. 16, yeah, you got Painted Red Start, yeah. So anyway, that's, let's take 7 million pictures and whittle them down. I keep going through them and getting rid of the ones that I think need to be weaned out to save space or make new space. So I usually keep around 12,000 photos in my library. Periodically, I'll go through them all and weed out a bunch of them I know will never make a print or be bought by an editor or whatever. That's my main goal, my criteria. And I've got one file I'm saving of birds pooping. I don't know if I'll ever make use of that in some way, shape, or form, but I get a lot of birds pooping while I'm looking at them through the lens. So I thought, well, I'm gonna start keeping these for whatever reason. Some people have odd bird watching lists, like birds they've seen it while in a shower or doing certain things. So I just got this bird pooping file going right now. I've only got 20 or so in there, but anyway, so like I said, art is in, the qualities in the eye of the beholder, and I've got my own things I like. I like pictures that look like they're paintings or shot in a studio. That's my goal. That's my number one goal. Some people don't like that kind of style. That's perfectly fine too. Some people don't do any processing. Nothing wrong with that. You won't get very many keepers, but that's fine. You do whatever makes you happy. So, okay.
All right. Well,
Like I said, if anybody wants to take a look at all the ones that didn't make top 50, you go to woodshots.com, WODSHOTS, and just about anything on that site. If somebody wants a print made, contact me through the website, and I can work it out. It usually takes about a week to get something done. I can do them on paper, framed or unframed, and acrylic ink on aluminum. I have those done now, and they're really spectacular. Okay.
all right. Well, I'm going to check the chat box one more time for any questions. Looks like we don't have any more, but someone did comment that if you were to make a bird proofing calendar, they would buy it. So just a little food for thought there. Fun times.
I got to get 12 really good ones then.
All right, well, thank you again, Gary, for the excellent presentation, and thank you to everyone who attended. We certainly appreciate it. If you're not already, please follow Fresno Audubon on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and also on YouTube. YouTube. So definitely check that out. We do hope you'll join us for next month's general meeting, which is scheduled for July 13th. So stay tuned for an announcement on that and some links for registration for that event. So have a great remainder of your week and stay safe out there. Good night, everybody.